start to a walk. That's the busy A47, just past the A43 junction, and we're actually walking along what used to be the old A47. And good morning. We are just walking into Tixover. This will be a short walk. Excuse the noise. This will be a short walk. I've always wanted to come back here. It's the first time I've been here for 21 years. It has a special place in my heart, particularly the church. And yeah, I'll tell you a little bit more about why the church is important to me. But there's a few historical buildings in Tixover, not too many. It's only a very small hamlet style village, but we'll find a few things of interest, and hopefully we'll also make the church, and fingers crossed we'll get inside the church as well. That's the plan. Now I believe that is Tixover House, but I'm not going to swear to it. I believe it is, in which case it's a 1700s building, possibly older. The reason I have doubts is there's no label on it saying Tixover House, and there's another big building next to it which I must admit I thought was Tixover House, but it actually says Tixover Lodge on the gate, so slightly confused start. It certainly looks old enough to be the Manor house, so I'm going to suggest that's probably what it is. Behind this high wall, which I'm never going to see over, is what I thought might be the Manor house, or Tixover House, or Tixover Hall I think is its proper name. But it actually says Tixover Lodge on the wall, so I don't think it is. That looks rather grander. It's hard to imagine this used to be the A47 Peterborough to Leicester Road, prior to them building the busy one to my right. Much busier. This one would not have coped with the traffic of today. There's quite a few old buildings in Tixover that are not listed, so I don't know much about them. It's a case of just seeing them and enjoying them, really. I mean, this looks quite old. The barns. Nice little ghost doorway in there. There's a letterbox. Wonder how old this one's going to be. It's set into an old wall. That's a Victoria again. VR. Very nice. As you can see, it's still very much an agricultural settlement, as it was in its earliest days, anglo-saxon. If I remember rightly, the word Tixover stands for ridge with young goats, for whatever reason, and it's anglo-saxon. And it runs alongside the River Welland. Somewhere in that direction there used to be a Roman villa, or a Roman villa was found. I think it's on this side the bank, just a little bit further downstream. So I'm sure there'll be Romans turning in their graves claiming Tixover was one of theirs, but Tixover as we know it today, definitely Anglo-Saxon. That's a hell of a barn, hell of a barn. As I say, none of these farm buildings are listed. They look like they should be. They're certainly old. Welland House, I think that one's called. It's a 1700s build. Used to be 3 cottages. There's now 1. Very desirable house. Lovely gardens. Riverside location. Pear Cottage, 1827, according to that date stamp on the top. Has the initials SOB above, which I think was Susan O'Brien. Certainly someone from the O'Brien family who held the manor here at one point. I think it might have been 1600s. I'll check the date on that. Lovely house. Coming up on the right is the Manor farmhouse, 1600s. Very much listed, and rightly so. Looks like a dovecot in the back garden there. I don't know that it is, but it looks like it. Yeah, that's a dovecot, I'm sure. Hidden by the trees. Very nice. Some seriously old willow trees there. I think they're willow trees. A few hundred years in those. Some lovely old buildings up there. Dogs didn't want to be on video. Looks like some sort of granary building to have a door up there. Lovely early spring setting. Way back 21 years ago, in the summer of 2003, I'd just become a wedding photographer, and the second wedding that I did was here at Tixover for young Steve and Hayley. And got to the village, couldn't see a church. I was nervous enough as it was, being that Steve was a good friend of mine, and it was only my second wedding, so I was hardly that experienced. And to find a village where you knew the wedding was being held at, but where there was no church, or no evident church, was spooking me. Directions that were given to me were, head down this farm track. So I did. And all the way down it I thought, I've got this horribly wrong. There cannot be a church in the middle of a farmer's field. But there was. And there, in the distance on the left, is Tixover Church, in the middle of nowhere. On the wedding day itself, being July of course, there were crops either side of this path, and it literally was driving through a cornfield. It probably wasn't corn, but it felt like I was driving through a cornfield, and being scary, which was my initial reaction, soon gave way to thinking this is fantastic, this is surreal. All church weddings must be like this. It was just fantastic. In reality, I never ever saw another church wedding like this, and still haven't in 21 years of being a wedding photographer. But I've always wanted to come back. The ironic thing is, I didn't know where it was. I can always remember the church. I always remember the wedding. Could I remember where it was? No. I had to go back to young Steve a few days back and said, where actually was that wedding? He said, Tixover. And that was it. That was my reason for coming out. I had to revisit this church. It's a lovely church anyway. I wouldn't have appreciated it as much at the time, apart from in the context of a wedding. But yeah, always wanted to come back. One of the biggest, if not the biggest, mystery of Tixover is exactly why is the church down here and such a long trek from the village. And the only explanation really is that the village has moved away from the church, and it is highly likely, if not certainty, that Tixover village was down here. Where down here I don't know, whether it was this side, the Welland, which is just behind the church, or the other side, we don't know. There is no proof, there's no documentation. It is all guesswork, but it would make no sense to build the church this far away from the village. I think the village was here and it moved. Why did it move? Again, take your pick. Some people say it was possibly because it flooded a lot, but it seems to be on high ground relative to the river, unless the village was down on the banks of the Welland itself rather than on this side of the church, in which case maybe it would flood. Others have said, or at least one report said, that the theory was that the river changed course. Now it's a sort of meandering river, the Welland at this point, and it is possible. Abandoned meanders, all that sort of stuff you will remember from your geography lessons at school, I'm sure. You know, rivers can change course slightly, and maybe that had something to do with it. Certainly one historian thinks that was the case. I might throw my own in, which maybe this dates back to a bubonic plague, Black Death problem. You know, maybe the village was hit hard, and maybe the villagers felt that let's get out of here and move 3/4 of a mile away from here and start afresh. I mean, that's just my own wild guess. Could be anything, we just don't know. But the church, as a result, is now completely isolated down here, which is a lovely setting for a church, I might add. Should you ever come down to Tixover and want to, well, first of all, you must come down and see the church, it's worth seeing. If you want to get inside the church, which is always locked, Manor farmhouse, which we passed just a few moments back, has the key to the church, and it hangs on their front door, and you are welcome to go and collect it, have a look around, and just make sure that you put it back. And I have the key, lovely big old key. But yeah, Manor farmhouse, they hold the key on their front door, and you can just go and help yourself, let yourself in, have a look around, make sure you put the key back afterwards. As I say, it's a lovely church, especially on a day like this. It's just starting to remind me of 2003 because it was a lovely blue sky, a bit warmer than this, but a very similar setting. Now it was built, it's a Norman church, it was built quite early in the 1100s, so an early Norman church that was significantly altered in the 1300s, and again I think in the 1800s. And really the tower is the Norman part, and although there's the odd bits and bobs from the 1100s church dotted around to the right of the tower, everything to the right of the tower is from the 1300s extension and beyond. But it's the tower really that gives this the real historical value. Classic early Norman windows. And the 3 slots at the top were where the bells were. But they've got that beautifully smooth top to the arches, which are what make it Norman. No points, just nice and smooth and round. And that lower one also has some lovely stonework, which is also classic Norman. Very classic Norman window, that is. Although pretty battered and weathered, that I forget what they're called now, that horizontal line of decoration in the stone there is also classic Norman. Runs all the way around the tower. It's an unusual ghost door there. Not quite sure how that works. It seems to be down with a trench underneath it, which presumably wasn't there. It's not Norman, it is part of the 1300s build. Quite a lot of historical arguments on the internet, differences in opinions about the non-Norman windows, these rectangular windows. Some say they date back to the original 1300s, but the architecture's just not right for that period. So many more think it's probably 1600s, 1700s, or even later than that. But again, it's never been concluded. I'd probably say they're not 1300s. They're just not right, not rectangular windows. Let's see if we can get inside. I don't know about the door itself. I don't think that's particularly 1,000 years old or 900 years old, but that is a Norman arch, minus the bit dangling down. The actual semicircular parts at the very top are definitely Norman. Shades of tick and coat, but not as big or grand or spectacular, but the bit below it has been added on. Probably still very old. That looks very much like an Ordnance Survey benchmark, slightly tampered with, but I think it is, because there's a hole at the top, which you would expect. Strange place for one. Just look if there's any graffiti around. There usually is in the doorways. Ah, there you go, other side. Fantastic. don't know if you can see the date at the bottom there, but it's 1723, I think. So what's that? 301 years old. 301 years ago, and somebody scratched that into the wall. I don't know if it's all medieval or not. I suspect the stuff that's nearly worn out is. We're in. This is the, I was to say more modern end of the church, but still very old, 1300s onwards. But there are older pieces around here. If you look around, I mean, these arches to the left here, because they're pointed at the top. I mean, they're still arches, but they come to a point because they're made out of two pieces, which was the way churches were built after about 1200s onwards. They stopped building the sort of Norman, solid, one-piece, smooth archways. But on the other side, you have that, which is Norman, because it is still one-piece, smooth, Norman arch, which suggests that the 1300s extension didn't sort of demolish what was here in the first place. It just built around it and extended it, basically. Rather grand monument. I might attempt to try and read out what's at the top. But it commemorates the death of a chap called Roger Dale, who had the manor. He died in 1623. It was actually built for Roger by his wife, and he's supposedly featuring members of the family. Not all of them, but some of them. A lot of sort of art critics have sort of put this one down and said the quality of the sculpturing of the faces is very poor. What is interesting historically is that she has no hands, and that he has no hands. Now, why do they not have hands? Again, this is where the myths come in. There's two theories. One is that it dates back to Cromwellian, Oliver Cromwell, that is. And for some reason he decided it wasn't going to be completely obliterated, but it chopped their hands off instead and left it at that. Could be true, could be true. Another one said it was a purely agricultural thing, which is probably just as, I don't know, is it unlikely? There's got to be a reason, but an agricultural excuse was that they chopped off as much of the, I think they call it alabaster, because if they crushed it up and turned it into medicine, it was something to do with improving the health of their sheep. So it's either sheep medicine or Cromwell on the rampage. Take your pick. I think this one down here had no head until recent centuries. Then they put this, God knows what you want to call that. It looks like something out of a horror movie, but if you consider that one, probably was something like what it's supposed to look like, and even that isn't great. That almost looks like the nearest boulder they could find. And we're walking in towards the tower now, and this is the Norman part of the church, and that arch is, you know, it's Tixover's answer to Tick-and-Coat. It's another magnificent, truly magnificent piece of Norman architecture. Fantastic arch, not in the same league as Tick-and-Coat, which you'll know if you saw the video. but still a fantastic piece of Norman architecture. It's probably considered to be very early Norman, probably earlier than Ticoncoat, less decorative. And I've never seen the insides of a Saxon church. There aren't many Saxon churches left, but apparently arches in Saxon churches don't look too dissimilar to this. And I would suggest this is kind of, it's the crossover period between Anglo-Saxon and Norman, and you've still got shades of both. It's a kind of hybrid between Anglo-Saxon and Norman architecture. Very, very old. Not sure I'd want to be in this room at night time, to be honest with you. That's a lovely, lovely, lovely Norman window. I don't mean the stained glass, but the very deep, look how thick the walls are. Classic Norman window opening. There is a ladder there, but I'm not going up it. Fairly plain looking font. The only part of age is you can work it out for yourself. From the stonework is the top, rather plain section, which isn't really Norman, it's just after Norman, it's 1300s. Nothing really to see, but it's been here a long time. And as is the case with many churches, it never used to be here originally, it would be by the door. Fonts always used to be near the main door, so it would have been over there, and it's been moved. Right, let's go and have a look outside. I'm not sure the wisdom of locking myself in. Let's hope this key works. Could be embarrassing. Yeah, we're safe. It's an old coffin slab there. I think I read somewhere it dates back to the 1300s, so it's an old one. You can never work out who they are. If it ever was inscribed, the inscription will not have survived. Let's take a look at this chap, if we can find him. If I can read it, that is. It says William Kettle, who died February the 22nd, 1901, I believe. I can't read the bottom one, it's covered in moss, but it will be his wife. Let's see if we can find William Kettle and who he was. 1901 death. Any details I can come up with, I'll put at the bottom of the screen as usual. I can actually read this one. George Pateman, who departed this life May the 3rd, 1915, aged 75 years. Abide with me. An interesting one. Guy Greville Wilson, CMG DSO, Colonel East Riding Yeomanry, and late 11th Hussars, Member of Parliament for West Hull, 1907 to 1910. Born 19th of May 1877, died February 1943. Whole series of very old grave slabs here. These are grade 2 listed if I recall, and they date back to 1200s, 1300s. They're old. Again, it's a pity you can't identify who was buried here. I'm sure there's absolutely no records going back that far, sadly. What a lovely morning. What a lovely place to enjoy a lovely morning as well. It's It's actually warm, at least warmish. That's Tixover for you. It wasn't a long one, but I'm pleased I made it back to the church. Brings back a lot of memories. Fantastically isolated, and I love the Norman architecture. I've got a thing about Norman architecture. I know it's plain, but it's just nice and simplistic, not overdone, and it's old, you know, 900 years old, and yeah, respect to that. And great to be able to get the key and come in. So like I say, if you do come down, you want to have a look around the church, pick the key up. It hangs at the side of the front door of Manor farmhouse, but do make sure you take it back afterwards. So that's it, I'm going to head back up now. So once again, thank you very much for joining me, and any comments as ever. Can't believe there's been many people watching this from Tixover, but there's bound to be one. But any comments of any sort, please add them, whether it's on Peterborough Images or YouTube. Just slot them underneath the video, always appreciated. And if you haven't subscribed already, please smash that button in the bottom corner. That's always much appreciated too. And that's it. I will see you next time out, and I only hope the weather will be as good as this.